Welcome to Norco College's Would You Like to Know More About? Today we're going to be talking about the Completion Initiative 2015. My name is Melissa Bader. I am a professor of English here at Norco College, and I'm really excited today to start talking about all things Completion Initiative, Guided Pathways and Equity, and kind of how Norco College got to where we are. It's 2022 now, so it's been a few years. Today with me, I have Dr. Kevin Fleming, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, Kevin Fleming. I'm the Vice President of Planning and Development, and it's a pleasure to be here for the inaugural podcast. This is something that the college has been working on for 7, going on 8 years, so it's fun to go down memory lane with you a little bit today.
That's exactly what we're going to do. We're kind of going to get in the Wayback Machine and figure out where we were and what our headspace was. Let's just start with an easy question. In 2015, what was your job at Norco College?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've had like 4 roles. I think I was Dean of Instruction of Career and Technical Education at the time in Academic Affairs.
Right, you were. I was a department chair, and I would like you to mentally put yourself back in 2015. We were on the rise. We had a somewhat new president who was a good guy. He was helping us get things going.
Paul Parnell.
Yeah, we were feeling we are Norco College, and we were getting excited about things. So when was the first time you heard the conversation that started about our completion numbers?
So I remember that my boss at the time, who was the VP of Academic Affairs, Diane Deckmeyer, her and a few others, and I don't know who all went to some high-impact conference. And in order to go to the conference, they had to do some data analysis prior. And I remember she was doing this preparation, and she was sharing it with us in an academic affairs meeting. And she was distraught over looking at the actual data of our students from 2010 to 2014. And looking at over that 4-year period, how we were actually doing. Because at the time, we didn't have those metrics. We didn't have state reports or scorecards really about our completion, and guided pathways wasn't a thing. And I remember she was saddened, and she went to the high impact conference and came back. And that's when can I say it? That's when the 9.8 made its debut.
Yes. So I had a similar experience. I was a department chair, and I think, and maybe I'm making this up and I'm just memorizing whatever I thought I had. But anyway, we were in the Academic Planning Council, and Dr. Deckmeyer and Greg Aycock, our all things data guy, came in and gave this presentation. And that this is the number for our completions. It's 9.8%. That's right. And my first thought was, well, I have been to graduation. I have seen all those students. How could that possibly be 9.8? I mean, we sat there every year, watched them graduate, sat and went, oh my gosh, another, yeah, there they go, yay.
Well, that's the first stage of grief, is like denial, right?
Yes. And the department chairs went, well, that can't be right. And actually that was something I remember that both Diane and Greg said to us at the time was, we had the same thought. They can't be right. So I give her credit. She really started that. And that summer of 2015, we had a big get-together, and we brought in faculty, students, classified professionals, administrators. I can't remember how many people were there.
There was like 40 to 50 for this 2-day summit that she pulled together. And I remember the advertisement that went out for it. It was very bold. And she sent out to the whole college in a college-wide email and said, our completion rate is 9.8 over the last 4 years. And I remember someone commenting to me on the site after reading that email, and they said, that's 1 out of 10. And it was a faculty member, and they said, so in my class of 30, that means 3 out of 30 kids in my class are actually completing.
Wow.
And that framing was like that light switch moment for her and for others. And so it drove people to show up to this 2-day summit where the advertising said, here's our numbers. Let's not sugarcoat it. Let's not be embarrassed by it. Let's just, acknowledge it and confront it and discuss it. And she said, if you're not satisfied with this, then show up. And there wasn't really, there was kind of a loose agenda. But the agenda was just to discuss and brainstorm and read some materials that were outside of our universe, from the Aspen Prize and some others, and read strategies and best practices to say, okay, so given that it's 9.8, what should we do if we're dissatisfied with this?
Right.
Like, the summit, the point of the summit was just, I think, to galvanize, I don't know, what do you think, like some interest, some motivation, really I think to transparently have a shared experience to get people on board with wanting to have change.
Yeah, I remember being in one of the groups and listening to the people talk, and we did Complete College America, the Aspen, Game Changers. There were good 4 or 5 sources that we looked at on who's doing this right. And what I remember doing was sitting in the room, and all the groups came back and they had written on the big poster pads, and they had all picked the same things as ways to improve.
Yeah, there's common themes there.
Yeah, and we went through them, and there is a picture of Dr. Green holding up that we all had the same thing. We all were like, well, we have got to do this. And it was meta majors, pathways, college to career, peer mentorship, and the 5th one I always forget.
I'm not looking at it. Well, there's faculty advising.
Faculty advising.
That's it.
That's it. So they stuck.
Yeah.
And I did a little research before we sat down to talk today.
Of course you
because
did.
I wanted to make sure that I had done my homework, because I'm that kind of student. And I went back and I looked at some of those initial PowerPoints that we had brought about afterwards, because it was still a smaller group, a subset of the college.
Yeah.
And it was still needing to get momentum. And that initial PowerPoint that we took to the Senate and the group as a whole had those things on there, but it also had this galvanizing momentum to it.
Yeah.
And in the records in the fall, we voted to do the completion initiative as an institution.
Well, I think you're a year off, because I remember feeling in my young middle administrator naivete, I was frustrated that we weren't moving fast enough.
Oh, well, yeah, that was true.
Yeah, because we here we are in this room. We had this 2-day summit. We all acknowledged 9.8 was not satisfactory. We wanted to do something about it. And we had all these goals and strategies that we were all aligned about. And I remember looking to Dr. Deckmeyer and saying, okay, so let's go. Like, let's enact the change. And she said, no, not yet. What do you mean? She goes, we have to get more people involved. And she actually said, I'm paraphrasing, but something like, we have to get more people to have buy-in and understanding, but she says we have to create the space for people to struggle and to dissent. And in order to get everyone on board. And so if you remember, we spent a whole year doing the brown bags.
Right.
So we did the completion initiative summit, and then in the whole 2015-2016 year, we did brown bags. And we had every month or every other month, we had a different brown bag. We had emails, we had conversations. We processed this for a year before there was any vote. We wanted to make sure everyone knew what we were talking about, why we were doing it, why the 9.8, where it came from and why it was dissatisfactory. And then at the end of that, then in 2016, then there was the vote. And then in fall 2016, then we actually started with the work groups.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, 100%. Those years get mushy, and honestly, after the last 2 years, there's a whole lot of mush going on in my head about when things happened and when things didn't happen. So, okay, so we did the brown bags. There were a lot of them, and we brought lunch, and we talked, and we dissented, and we argued, and we used a lot of Post-it notes and stuck them all over places. And then we did come and have a vote. I thought we had a vote first and then another vote, but...
Well, we might have done... We like to vote around. We
did?
probably had a
Wow,
vote to do the brown bags, and then another
Oh my gosh.
vote about the results of the brown bags.
Oh, yes.
We probably overprocessed it. That's how
we
we
probably voted a lot.
But to her credit, and not just her credit, but to the college's credit, but Dr. Deckmeyer gets a lot of credit for this. That's why it succeeded, I think.
Yeah.
And as I was reflecting for today, it's like, why did this work? And so many other initiatives over the last 12 years I've been here have fizzled. I think it's because of that year. I think it's because we took the time to really make sure everyone understood really what the problem was, and then to galvanize around possible solutions. And I think that's what made this sticky.
Yeah, I have had a lot of time to reflect on this because, among other things that we've done with being part of the guided pathways at the California state level, with the GP20 and all the work we did with that, that happened 2.5 to 3 years later. And then I was in Leading from the Middle, and one of our themes was guided pathways. And so I was helping to coach teams who were getting guided pathways and learning. They had it enacted upon them in many ways. And there was certainly work going on, but many of the 114 community colleges were given guided pathways as a framework, and they didn't choose the way to do things in the same way that Norco College had.
Now, you glossed over something pretty significant that people may not know. You said GP20.
Yeah.
So after we decided to do this locally, then what is GP20, Melissa?
Right. So the GP20, which is actually just a goofy name, is the California Guided Pathways project. And we applied. It's run by Rob Johnstone and other people. And it was a 3-year commitment to really help to facilitate the implementation of guided pathways and the guided pathways framework. And I want to stop for just a second, stick a pin in guided pathways framework, because I think sometimes there's a misconception about guided pathways, or there's an idea. Let's just not say it's a misconception because that has a bad connotation, but that guided pathways is really student-facing.
Mm-hmm.
And guided pathways is really not student-facing. It's an institutional framework for the way that we think about ourselves. And certainly the 4 pillars of guided pathways, which is, clarify the path, get them on the path, keep them on the path, and ensure learning, that's really meant for an institution. That's not necessarily meant for a student. And what has happened over the last, 7 years,
Mm-hmm.
we have shifted and changed the institution so much that I think it gets mixed into that. And one of the things that I think we need to do now is reframe that, because the 9.8, that percentage point, was so galvanizing for us. We were indignant, we were angry, and we were ashamed that that was what we had been doing.
Mm-hmm.
By letting students just come in here and figure it out and swirl around, and the average units was in the hundreds for what should be a 2-year institution. So I think those data points were easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
And we started making changes as soon as we possibly could, with onboarding and defining what our majors were and why and how they got through. And there's a ton of work, and we could talk all about that. But really what I want to talk about is this attitudinal sort of shift that the institution had. And I think partially where we are now is a result of our complete and total, and I don't like the term buy-in, our mind shift, our mindset shift that happened in 2015 and 2016, and then really being solidified in 2017.
Absolutely. And I like how you're talking about the institutional kind of paradigm that shifted, because I remember a decade ago, we would have colleagues talk about the fact that students had the right to fail.
Mm.
And the analogy that was used early on was about the cafeteria model, where you go to a cafeteria and you can get kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, and then you walk out and pay, and you don't have a complete meal, but you have a lot of stuff on your tray.
Mm-hmm.
And we were trying to get away from that from a course perspective and say, no, we're going to be more directive. We're going to give them the combo meal. So when they get here, they're going to get, their fruits and their vegetables and their proteins and their milk, and they're going to get English and their math.
I've never heard it's called the combo meal before.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. It's In-N-Out combo number 1. Like when you order, you could do it a la carte. Or
Make
get
it
the combo
California,
meal.
In-N-Out.
That's right. Hey, we're a product
I'm
of our
a number
environment.
3, no onions, thanks.
Animal style, all the way.
No.
And so I think that paradigm shifted where we said, okay, it's not all right for a student to fail. And it's certainly not okay for 90.2% of our students to fail. And so we started restructuring the way we thought, to your point. And so
Right.
It was no longer a cafeteria model, but how do we be a little more directive? And how do we help them? One of my favorite quotes is from Stephen Covey, author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And habit 1 is you start with the end in mind. And so for students, graduation's not the goal, it's a milestone. The goal is a successful career. And so what does that look like programmatically, right? And there's been a lot of work, especially in student services in that space. But yeah, we've changed the way I think we think about as institution. And I would argue taking more responsibility for what we used to say, oh, well, that's the student's responsibility. It's their obligation. It's their role. I just show up and teach. We just show, we hand out a flyer and we open up the office and then it's up to them to come to us. And I think we've flipped that.
Yeah. And actually, I think one of the reasons that I thought of you initially for having this conversation is that career in mind moment. Because when you came to the college, CTE exploded because you hustled and you got all those, there was great work happening, but you really helped focus that work and the institution on career. And in the region, we jumped up in CTE and our presence in the CTE world. So I think you were the perfect person to have as that conversation was coming towards us. Let's not just talk about academia. I mean, let's be honest. We liked academia. We stayed.
That's right.
I've never had a job outside of academia. We'll just leave it at that. I've never worked outside of academia other when I was in college and I picked up golf balls. So that's it. And I get blinders on. I'm used to being in the classroom. I'm used to being with the students. And it doesn't mean that before that we didn't care about our students and we didn't want them to succeed, but we did have this sort of like, hey, buddy, it's on you.
Yeah.
Because that's what we had, right? We look at our students and think, well, this was how I learned. This was how I liked it. And we didn't know that it was, well, we knew it was hard, but we didn't know that it was not equitable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really good point because in doing my research and going back and looking, equity was part of the conversation from the moment we started.
Yes.
And it's getting intertwined now in this way. And people have been saying all along that guided pathways work is equity work, but I don't think that that's always clear to people, that it started off with a little bit of the rising tide. We can clear out a lot of these processes for every single student who comes here.
Mm-hmm.
But the model of student care that we're working towards is that high level of student care that we have in our support programs. And actually that will be podcast number 2. I didn't really mean to be, plugging it now, but hey, we'll be talking about that more in podcast number 2. But let's talk about just for a second that career in mind point, because in setting our meta majors and in organizing our institution around these clusters, that was a big question. Is it the academic route that the cluster should be making around, or is it the career end where they should be clustered around? And you were part of that conversation for sure.
Yeah, and I think we're still having that conversation as an institution. And I think, to your point, we have a lot of colleagues here who really would just see their role rather myopically just to get a student to commencement, as if that's the sole purpose we exist, is just to give them that piece of paper. And we didn't often look beyond that. And through the completion initiative, we started having the conversation about, well, wait a minute. What are all the jobs a student can go into with a degree in art? And how do we embed industry credentials into our courses? And how do we make sure our students have a competitive advantage when they graduate beyond the students at the other neighboring community colleges that have the same, in air quotes, the same degree? How do we make sure they have not just the interview skills? Okay, I have a resume, I have an interview, fine. But how do they stand head and shoulders above by having the in-class or out-of-class work experiences that gives them that breadth and that focus to know, hey, if I go through Norco College and I get anthropology or logistics management or whatever the degree is, they know what their first, second, and third career options could be. And that conversation needs to be brought in earlier. I remember I mentioned art. I remember the art discipline was the first group that held early on in the completion initiative, like all the things you can do in art when you graduate, and they had people in the art gallery, and it was a focus on careers. And it was a big deal because it was the first time in recent memory that it was not a CTE discipline doing it, but it was a general ed
Right.
discipline that was talking about connecting to careers. And that was a paradigm shift, I think, for a lot of us,
Right.
to really look at, no, if you're a philosophy major, if you're a political science major, those students hopefully plan to have a job someday, and they want to be gainfully employed, and they want to be vibrant contributors to their community. It's not just about the paper, although that's a good milestone. So how can we bake that conversation in early and make sure we're helping them to get, again, the skills, I think is the key word. It's the skills, the knowledge, and the experiences while they're here, so they're just more competitive when they get out.
Right. That's a great example, because I think art definitely did that really well. And I think that was partially because the people in art at that time had other professions outside of academia. And so they were like, yeah, that's an argument we have to make a lot as artists. How are you going to make money? And so that one really lent itself very well to that conversation. We are now faced with looking at our meta majors again, because at the time we chose simplified. No one else had done it. Other than Florida, where the state legislature had given them their meta majors, which,
That's right.
please, I wish that California had done that. It would have simplified our lives, but they didn't. So we had to go and make them up ourselves. And we kind of did a little cheating by saying we have 4, but really we have 5. And we got more excited about choosing colors and making sure those things were right, which I take a lot of.
Hey, those are symbolically
I take a lot of the
important.
blame for that. I
No,
really
those were good
wanted.
choices.
We've had little tussles over those colors afterwards, but again, in very Norco College fashion, we've come together around it, and it's time now, because we are however many years later, to re-examine and to look at our meta majors again. We're part of a larger institution in the district, and our sister colleges have gone through this exercise as well. And if we really get back to that idea that what is the student-facing part of this? How are we going to help students to recognize where they belong and make the institution smaller? And I think we forget there are 15,000 plus students, or have been, at Norco College. That's a lot. That's a lot of students. It's a lot of stuff to navigate. It's completely different. And if we can just make it a little bit smaller for them and say, these are your people, or we think these are your people, and you can help find your people, then you will have a higher success rate. And we know that. And that's your peers, because we've found out through lots of surveys, most of our students get most of their information from their peers. That's their faculty they're going to see on a normal basis. And those are people who have had jobs that they're looking to have. And we just need to expand that network and help the students see that.
Well, and I love the way you phrased it. We almost need to do a reset internally of what's the point of these meta majors, or of our currently our 4 schools. And maybe it is time to expand them to 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever the right number is. But we need to start with the why. Like, why is it beneficial for students? And you just nailed it. It's to give them a community of like-minded individuals that have common interests, so that they can find their people, to use that phrase, and they can feel at home. And there's a group of people that can support them, and they can ask questions of and have events with. And there are sciencey people and there are artsy people, and there's nothing wrong with saying that. And so there might be sciencey people with a maker space over here, and artist people with a theater production over there. And it's just creating those learning communities. And there's no art, there's no science to it. It's an art, right? So there's no right or wrong answer if we should have 4 or 6 or 7. But I agree. I think it's time to revisit, because we've learned a lot since we started those and created our 4. And really stretching the way we put them together. We have over 80 degrees and certificates at Norco College. They're organized into 42 program areas, but we can't have 42 schools. And so how do we batch those into likes, but have them be meaningful? So yeah, I think that's probably the next cusp of where we're ready for that discussion.
Yes, and that is definitely
Yes,
my
and.
phrase. Yes, and the flip side of that is, we need to create an identity for us in those schools.
Yeah.
And, I have visions of people wearing the T-shirt, which, the School of Arts and Humanities or whatever it is. And I think that we then need to also help our institution have identity around those spaces and people. And that's a heavy lift, and we are going to have to work really hard to get another why about that. And we don't have a 9.8 this time, and it seems a little more difficult to me right now. We don't have that galvanizing moment of here we go. Although now as I say that, I think we do.
I think we do.
I think we have been asking for a dismantling of this institution of school away from the British boys' school model of the right to fail for the last 7 years. And I think the pandemic changed everything.
For sure.
We completely remade ourselves in about a week and a half, and we continued to remake ourselves. Our students have continued to remake themselves. And right now, we are the most tenacious bunch of people around. We're a little tired, but we are poised and ready to come back, not to normal, not to a new normal. We are poised and ready to come back to something better for our students. And that, I think, may be our why.
Yeah, I think we're ready.
I think we are too.
And I think no one wants to go back to the way things were.
No.
Because if we're honest, it wasn't always that great. But we want to evolve, we want to enhance, and we need to make sure our students really can find their place. And I love what you said about having that galvanizing focus around schools and having them matter. I think the mistake we made before is it didn't really matter. And I say that in air quotes with love, but there was no real role or purpose or teeth or anything with the schools. And we had this question, well, we have these departments, then we have schools, and what's the difference? And I think we have to struggle with that and have the schools matter so that students are drawn to them. And I love what you said about place, about having a place for the schools. 3 presidents ago, you mentioned Paul Parnell. He used to say that propinquity matters.
Oh.
And I had to look it up the first time he said it too. Propinquity, proximity,
Yeah.
closeness, and where people's offices are, where people's classrooms are, where student gathering spaces are, matters. And that creates the wayfinding and the traffic pattern of a student's experience. And so I think we need to identify common, whether it's a quad, whether it's a courtroom or a courtyard or a classroom, we need to identify space that says this is my school's home. And
Right.
here's where we can hang out at lunch and be with other like-minded folks.
Right. Yeah. I think that gives us a lot of stuff to think about for this year and ending up and then into next year on finding that momentum and finding that why again and moving boldly into the next phase, to boldly go.
I think that might
my
be
inner
copywritten.
geek is showing, but
yeah, we might have to snip
we
that
can't
out.
we can't definitely use that one. But but that idea that we are going to be stepping into the phase post-pandemic with intention, with data-driven, equity-minded decision-making as an institution. And I think that Norco College is definitely up for the challenge. We love to innovate, and we like getting out in front. And this is just another one of those things where we're going to go and jump out in front with not a lot of guide and make it happen and make it work for the students at Norco College.
Oh, and just like the opening of that Completion Initiative Summit in 2015, the direction was, we don't quite know how we're going to get there, but we know that we're doing it together, and we have a clear sense of why. And I think if we can start there and move together, then there's no wrong answer.
That's terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you
For coming in. This was great. And thank you to Brady and Michael who are in the booth with us today, helping to produce. And I hope that if you've listened, that you've maybe found something that you want to chew on a little bit and come into the conversation with us. We're looking for folks to move into the next phase. So thank you. Until next time, my name is Melissa Bader, and this has been Would You Like to Know More About the Completion Initiative 2015.